Hi everyone, Travis Cooper here in Anchorage, Alaska, and for my writing lesson, I'm just going to go ahead and continue with the same theme I used for my reading lesson. And again, this is something I anticipate on using in my class coming up here after spring break. But if you recall, I did my reading lesson over Sir Cumference in the first round table. And so to kind of connect to that, the next thing I want to do is kind of teach my students how to utilize a graphic organizer, and kind of we'll go through and we will be using a graphic organizer to kind of still talk and discuss about what happened in the book, but then we're also going to use how are we using this graphic organizer to start to create our own ideas about a book that we want to eventually write. So each student will be writing their own book, and so they'll have to come up with their own ideas. And so we'll use this to kind of break down the ideas that already happened in the book we already read, and then from there we can just kind of change things up and modify a few situations and terms, and maybe bring in a different character and that they can write their own story with. Okay, so to use the graphic organizer, one thing we want to keep in mind is we don't really want a lot of words up here, but we just want the main words, the important words that we see. And you can tell here, I went ahead and we have the center one here, and that's kind of what I did is I just pulled the title of the book and I put it right there. But you can tell I didn't write the title exactly the way it was. So I have Sir Cumference and I have Round Table, because those are the two kind of main points from the title that I got and I put there. And then next we can see we have a variety. We have four things here, and so we can decide what are the four main points that we kind of want to address. So you can see here we just went ahead and divided up our four more circles here, and the top one up here we just have characters. And if you remember from the book, there were a few more characters than just Sir Cumference. So we will kind of want to briefly go back and think about who was actually involved in the book besides the main character. We also want to talk about a little bit about, well, what were they doing? What was the event that kind of happened? What was the main event? And what was that main problem? So we'll kind of brainstorm and we'll get a few notes down here about what the event or problem was. And then we can jump over here, and I went ahead and wrote math. Because it is a geometry class, we want to go ahead and decide, well, how did the book actually address math and what was it that it used? And then the last circle over here that kind of ties to Sir Cumference was, well, what was the outcome? How did the story kind of wrap itself up? Alright, so let's go ahead and look at our first circle here off of our main idea, and we just kind of wanted to brainstorm some ideas of some characters. So when we read through our story here, we were first introduced to our king, and we also had a bunch of other knights involved. And then we had some important characters. Sir Cumference, he had a wife named Lady Di, and so I went ahead and just put her name, but I also made a little note off to the side that it was his wife, because that connection might be helpful later on. And then Sir Cumference also had a son named Ray. So let's go ahead and just look at real briefly how we filled out the rest of our graphic organizer here. So let's go ahead and look about the events or problems, and again we just brainstormed some ideas. The king didn't like the table. There was a bad table, and if you recall, he didn't like the table because there was too much shouting that was happening, and that wasn't very good for communication. Right here we went ahead and just talked a little bit about the math that was involved, or math terms that we heard of or thought of as we read the text. And we did talk about rectangles, triangles, and spent quite a bit of time talking about circles. So for circles, sometimes what you can do with graphic organizers, you don't always have to use words. I went ahead and drew a picture, because pictures definitely help us explain things and see things better. So I went ahead and just drew a picture kind of depicting what it is I remembered from the text about math. And the outcome was the Circumference came up with a design to use a circle for a table. That way all the knights could see each other and hear each other well, and no one was shouting. And there was no battle, so that was kind of important to note. And then this last one was a little bit longer of a note, but for our conclusion and outcome, really, circumference, diameter, and radius were all defined in terms of math, and so that kind of ties us back to what we were doing with the math. We're going to use pretty much the same stuff here, but we were going to change around and use different math terms. So we want to use some different math terms related to circles for us, and we're going to try coming up with our own event and kind of talk about what could happen and write a story about it, and then we'll have our own conclusion and outcome. So I'll go ahead and give you a blank one of these, and we can practice coming up with some ideas on how to do that. And so this is how I'd go through and teach how to use a graphic organizer based on a story we read, and kind of helping prepare students to facilitate their own story based on some different math terms that there isn't an actual story for. So thanks for the feedback. Hopefully I can get it before the end of spring break and get a good lesson plan written around it. Thank you all. Have a good break.